My name is Kimberly Mazik, and I'm the Associate Director at the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, where we work to bring the principles of Catholic social teaching to national and global conversations, to build bridges across political and religious division, and encourage young people to see their Catholic faith as central to their lives and work. I want to welcome all of you here to Georgetown's Capitol campus. I know some of you it may have been a new adventure. We're not at the School of Continuing Studies because that is now housed here at the Capitol campus, but we're grateful to be here. So this is our first gathering here as the initiative, and we're here tonight for a Latino leader gathering on renewing politics from the ground up, lessons from Latino organizing. We've had a great response to this conversation with all of you here, plus hundreds of others joining us online. We've held over 200 gatherings since our founding 12 years ago, and are so glad that we are began streaming when we were able to begin our dialogues around the principle of Catholic social teaching to over 425,000 people, both nationally and internationally, which includes over 30 Latino leader gatherings that have brought over 30,000 people together. In the United States, the history of Latino participation in politics emphasizes collective efforts and solidarity as central parts of political activity. Latinos are often positioned as decisive voters who can drive the course of national electoral politics into the future. As we look forward to the 2026 midterm elections in the United States, this Latino gathering will discuss how principles of faith-based grassroots organizing can be applied to national politics, voters, parties, and political leaders. Tonight, we brought together 4 remarkable leaders for this conversation, some who I've known for a while and grateful to see again. That includes Joanna Ariana Gonzalez. She's the co-founder and director of training and formation at the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership, a Catholic and Christian-rooted community organizing coalition that integrates liberation theology, spirituality, and grassroots organizing to advance community transformation. Nicholas Hayes Mota is a social ethicist, public theologian, and assistant professor of religious studies at Santa Clara University. Informed by his 15 years of experience as a practitioner and teacher of community organizing, his work focuses on the role of religion in democratic public life, the ethics of democratic citizenship, and the possibilities of a politics of the common good. Next, we have Julie Chavez Rodriguez. She's a political strategist and an organizer who served as a campaign manager for Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden's presidential campaigns. She was a presidential fellow, currently is a presidential fellow at Chapman University, and previously served as senior advisor to Biden and the director of intergovernmental affairs in the Biden-Harris White House. And finally, we have Rosie Villegas Smith. She's the founder of Voces Unidas por la Vida, a pro-life education, advocacy, and community organizing group in Phoenix, Arizona. She speaks and advocates widely on pro-life issues, especially with Hispanic and Latino communities. Moderating our conversation tonight will be my colleague, Christian Sunin, the project's manager of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. You're all in for a treat tonight. This is going to be an amazing conversation. Please join me in welcoming this wonderful group.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone to Georgetown's new Capitol campus. We're so excited to be holding our first gathering here in this new space, so close to the Capitol. A special welcome to all of those of you who are watching us on the live stream. When we get to the Q&A period, we'll be taking questions from our in-person audience here at Georgetown. But those of you who are joining us online, please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag LatinoOrganizingCST and by tagging @GUCST Public Life on X and Instagram. Tonight's conversation will center around the tradition of community organizing, a practice and process that encourages the participation of all within a community by forming bonds of solidarity. It works towards the common good and develops the dignity of a community and all of its members. As such, organizing has held an important place in the life of the Catholic Church and in Catholic social thought for generations. This era of dynamic change in U.S. national politics has exposed new tensions and worsened old ones between political institutions and the people that they are meant to serve. After the 2024 election, both major political parties have to reckon with accusations that they failed to represent and understand the interests of voters, instead focusing on policies and strategies that favor political and economic elites. Community organizing, both for local level issues and for broader political movements, can serve as a way to renew the voice of people in politics and serves as an important deepening of our democracy. Latino communities, especially those motivated by the Catholic faith, have been at the forefront of grassroots organizing efforts and people-powered change, drawing from a rich tradition that is informed by Catholic teaching. This conversation will explore how this tradition can inform politics driven by and in service to the people, especially society's most vulnerable members, and oriented towards the common good. We're so glad to have this incredible group of leaders with us today who will help us think about these questions. So with that, let's get started. And Julie, I want to come to you first. You've been around this your whole life. You started working with farm workers in California, and you've done this also at the highest levels of national politics on political campaigns. What is the most important principle that guides community organizing work and could help renew national politics?
Well, thank you so much for having me here, and it's wonderful to be able to join you all, both in person and those of you who are joining online. I think for me, and one thing that's critically important right now, and that I think is a key principle in community organizing, is solidarity and coalition building. In my mind, that is kind of core to being able to build out kind of an important strategy to, whether it's to advocate for a particular issue or to ensure that we're effectively bringing in kind of the voices of those that are impacted in so many different ways. And I think growing up in the farm worker movement, we saw that firsthand. First with Latino and Filipino farm workers joining forces to come together and start the first grape strike, to then later organizing college students to be able to come and support efforts to organize in Delano and other communities. Later, the Great Boycott was able to enlist anyone, anywhere to take action in support of farm workers. And those are the kinds of things that we're seeing right now with the kind of organizing that we've seen, especially over the last 10 months. And I'd say, in particular, that I've seen in Los Angeles since June 6th, since there were ICE raids that started in those communities, and the kind of coalition that came together swiftly to provide mutual aid, to make sure businesses were, businesses had the support that they needed, especially for those owners that didn't feel comfortable being able to go to work, being able to, of course, bring in the faith community and have such a strong, powerful moral authority in support. So I'd say, solidarity and coalition building for me.
Certainly two of the central principles there. Nicholas, I want to turn to you now with the same question. What is the most important principle that guides community organizing work and could help renew national politics?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you to the initiative for the opportunity to have this really vital conversation, and to all of you likewise for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. I very much agree with what Julie said about solidarity, a core principle of Catholic social teaching, and I would add another core principle of Catholic social teaching, namely the dignity of the human person. Mm-hmm. I think at its core, organizing is an approach to politics that prioritizes dignity in multiple ways, starting at the individual level. By giving people an experience of their own power and their own agency, it develops a sense that they have worth, they matter, and they have something to contribute to our ongoing discussion of what the common good of our society is. And it's particularly concerned to provide that sense for marginalized or oppressed communities, excluded communities, that don't have that sense that they fully belong or that they have a voice that should be heard. And so it can be personally transformative, and often is, for those who experience it, because it develops that personal sense of dignity. And I would speak from experience there. As a gay Catholic, in many contexts, I have been made to feel the absence of my own sense of worth, and have struggled for much of my life with an internalized sense of shame that I think is familiar to people in many marginalized communities, expressed in different ways. And it was through organizing that I learned to actually step into my own power, find I had a voice, and find I had a worth I couldn't find in almost any other way. So I think that's part of what's drawn so many people to it, so many Catholics to it in particular. It's a way of making dignity real at the personal level. but also at the interpersonal level. I think organizing teaches us how to treat people different from ourselves, racially, culturally, religiously, economically, also ideologically and politically, as fellow citizens, fellow human beings, likewise possessed of dignity, which we need to respect, right? Even if we have profound disagreements. And it's also a way of teaching those in power who often fail to fully recognize the dignity of particular groups that they need to, and their voice needs to be heard. They have a place at the table. So it operates interpersonally. And then at a social level, I think organizing is about building a society that more genuinely does reflect, respect, and promote the dignity of all. So it's really a practice of dignity, and that goes all the way back to its still very controversial and I think often misunderstood founder, Saul Alinsky, who is quite clear. Dignity of the person is the guiding star of the organizer, he wrote. And so this has been embedded in the DNA of organizing for over 80 years. And I think it's found a particularly rich expression in Latino Catholic communities.
Rosie, the same question to you. What is the most important principle that guides community organizing work and can help renew our national politics?
Well, for Voces Unidas por la Vida, we work with pregnant mothers and the Hispanic community. And I think one thing that drives us to address the needs that they have and also go to the places where the families are, because we need to create also awareness and realize that it's very important, especially in the Hispanic community, to reach out to the families and to the women and the people we're serving through social media. Because right now, for example, for us, we're running a pregnancy assistance center virtually, and we have been able to help many women to save lives. And how do we reach them? Through social media. And sometimes we can have the best services available, but if people don't know that they exist through social media, it's difficult to reach out to people. So I think that it's very important to address the issue that we need to reach out to people through social media. And our 3 fund bases that we have for Voces is a prayer, formation, and action. Form communities, educate them about life issues, also help women directly, providing services to them. And not forgetting our roots, that is prayer, because with prayer we can reach out so many things. We can be working the best program, but we just think about ourselves and our own abilities. We don't get that far. I think we need to also tap into the spirituality that we have as a community, especially in the Hispanic community with our faith, Catholic and evangelical and different faiths, reaching out to the richness of our spirituality to be able to help our community.
In the last conversation that we had on the deportations and assaults on human dignity, we had Archbishop Wensky from Miami, who had led efforts to bring prayer and the Mass into the detention center known as Alligator Alcatraz. And one of the things he said was one of the things that makes humans so dignified was the very fact that they are possessed of the ability to pray, to reach out. And so hearing Nicholas talk about dignity and now you talk about how prayer informs that work seems to certainly touch on that same point. Finally, Joanna, I want to come to you for the same question. What is the most important principle that guides community organizing work and can help renew our national politics?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for having us. I would say at the heart of organizing is about relationship building. It's how we build power to transform oppressive systems. And there is no shortcut to building relationships. It takes time, trust, patience, meeting people where they're at. And I see it similarly to, being in prayer with God. You are intentional, you open yourself up, you listen, you're present. And I think that's the real gift in relationship building, where we get to witness one another's journey. We get to hear what moves people, what shapes them, what their vision for the world is. And stories humanize. We're able to see beyond the misconceptions, the chismes, the judgments, and, as Nicholas mentioned, to recognize the dignity of the person in front of us. And when I was in the labor movement, I used to work with domestic workers across the country to prep them to share their stories to the media. And most times they would be really, 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 really scared. But because of the relationship that we had built that took time, trust, and coaching, they would then have the confidence to share their stories to outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post, which would then help move policies forward. And one thing was true for all the señoras and the domestic workers that I worked with is that despite everything that they had been through, they still made time to show up for a campaign because they saw themselves as a protagonist, as Pope Francis says. And so I think that's something that we need in national politics is to go back to relationship building and listening to the struggles, hopes, and aspirations of everyday people.
Julie, I want to come back to you now to talk a little bit more about your very unique experiences here. You've been at the forefront of organizing work since you were little. Your grandfather was Cesar Chavez, who by all accounts can really be credited with leading one of the most foundational movements for Latino political participation in United States history. You've talked about learning from those efforts as a child, and they've no doubt inspired your political career. Can you say more about the spirit that inspired that work? Where has that spirit been lost? Where does it live on? And after several decades of Latino political participation in the United States, in national politics, what's changed now for Latino voters and communities, and what challenges remain the same?
Well, I'd say, my grandfather was a devout Catholic. It's how we were all raised, and we saw, faith as, action. It was about being able to live your faith, and you did it through service and service to others. And so at a very early age, that's, what he instilled in me, he instilled in our family, and helped to really guide a movement. A lot of people don't know the United Farm Workers up until the early 90s was a completely volunteer-driven organization where volunteers would literally receive $5 a week, but they would receive, food and board, and their basics were taken care of. But it was, that level of kind of commitment to La Causa that, I thought that was normal. I later went off to college at UC Berkeley and realized, oh wow, I had a kind of a unique, childhood. That not everybody had, a front row seat to organizing in that way. And so, every march was led by the Virgen of Guadalupe because that was the patron saint for so many farm workers. And that was both symbolic, but also extremely strategic and purposeful in the organizing effort. And, I remember the first time I got to lead a march, I was 12 years old and we were in Salinas, California. And my cousin Dave and I got to hold La Virgen, and it was, it was just one of those moments where it was like, kind of like our badge of our Girl Scout badges, right? We get La Virgen, and we also got arrested kind of young for civil disobedience, but I can share that story later. But, all of that just instilled in me that sense of agency and that desire to help instill that sense of agency in others in whatever way possible. And so I didn't imagine politics was going to be the avenue, but after a community organizer named Barack Obama decided to run for president, I realized that maybe organizing and politics are driving towards or can drive towards the same kind of outcomes that we want to see. And after seeing things like Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and the ACA pass, and the transformation that had on so many individuals, lives and experiences, to me, those were things that we needed to continue to really infuse in the kind of, organizing and politics that we want to see and we want to be a part of. And, as you mentioned, focusing on the things that are present in people's everyday lives. We know that there's a lot of suffering and a lot of struggle, and so how do we continue to really, prioritize things like affordable childcare or access to childcare? I saw New Mexico as one of the first states to have universal childcare. Just recently, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham just recently signed that into law, and so, I think those are some of the efforts that we need to, reroot ourselves in. As we think about just our national political priorities and policy priorities in this moment.
So carrying La Virgen and getting arrested kind of young are the two badges of honor for a community organizer. So you started there, you started in a movement that was really trying to get Latinos to have a voice on the national stage. And now you, from that same movement, have led you've had key positions in the Obama White House and the Biden White House, and you led the Biden-Harris campaign and then the Harris-Walz campaign, some of the most, the highest level of national politics. After the 2024 election, the Democratic Party as a whole was often accused of losing touch with voters, especially working class voters, and focusing on the wrong issues, failing to reach out to key constituencies. How do you view these challenges? And more importantly, how does the party rebuild? And how might grassroots efforts be a part of that renewal?
Yeah. Well, I think grassroots efforts are vital. I mean, I've said, over the course of the last several months, as we see, and no diss on DC, right? But as we see our federal government broken right now, it is a critical opportunity to look local and to think about base building and to think about the kind of grassroots organizing that we need to ensure are reaching people, especially, as we start to realize, right now in this moment, right, as people are being disappeared, like making sure that they have access and ability to, be able to, whether it's reach lawyers or to support their families. But as this horrific bill goes into effect and we see, cuts to kind of food stamps and Medicaid and so many critical, needs, it really is the grassroots organizing and organizations that we know have always been there. And, I think COVID was an interesting time that, ensured that we had critical systems of support for our communities. And I think we are, in a moment where that level of emergency response and mutual aid is happening in so many different ways. Again, some of it's in response to immigration enforcement, but some of it's in response to just the needs that communities are facing right now. And so I do think Democrats need to focus on those key issues and focus on things like housing. I know in the in the campaign, those short 107 days for Harrison Walls, we did put forward a really strong housing policy and plan that didn't get a lot of attention, but that to me is like one of the most critical issues. I mentioned childcare being another critical issue, but as we think about like what are families having to reconcile at the end of the month, that's what we have to focus on, and those have to be kind of front and center in what we're fighting for, and also making sure that people understand who's to blame for the cuts that are about to hit them.
You make an important point that maybe we should return to later on. One is the party priorities, but certainly the media ecosystem plays a very important role in shaping how people organize what priorities they follow. Nicholas, before we talk about that, I want to turn to you. You're an expert on Catholic social teaching and Catholic organizing principles, and you have more than a decade of organizing work informing your work. When we think of how members of a community understand themselves as political agents, what does local level community organizing allow in terms of political and community participation that might be lost in national level politics? And then how can we renew national level politics so that they might be more dynamic, more responsive to people's needs, and more oriented towards the common good?
Small questions we ask here, right? So I think I would start by saying that organizing historically comes out of what you could call the U.S. American tradition of radical democracy. And whether it's Thomas Jefferson or Alexis de Tocqueville or John Dewey or the entire lineage of grassroots organizers of the 19th century, you have this idea that to really experience democracy, you've got to do it at the local level for a variety of reasons. And that idea directly informed Saul Alinsky in the 1930s. It directly informs the various strands of the organizing tradition that developed from him, including the UFW and before that, the CSO in California, the Industrial Areas Foundation. And the basic idea is, why do you need democracy at the local level? For several reasons. One, it's at the local level that people can actually encounter each other interpersonally and begin to move beyond relating to each other through abstractions, ideological abstractions, racial abstractions, that cause us to reduce others' humanity to whatever that abstract identity category is. Big problem in our politics now, right? And organizing disrupts that by actually having people across various kinds of difference encounter each other, build relationships along lines of mutual values, shared stories, and common interests, and then actually have to work together over time and develop the bonds of trust and solidarity that create collective power and make action for change possible. And so at a time when our social media ideologically polarizes us and rewards essentially going after each other because of our in-group and out-group, this is a pretty radical countercultural thing. And it really happens best at the local level. In the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization where I worked, one place where we saw this was we had an organization that was sharply divided on the issue of gay marriage when that was legalized in Massachusetts. In fact, one day, 2 of the leaders of our organization came out in favor of gay marriage, 2 against, on the same Sunday Boston Globe page, front page. Right? So what did we do? What the organization decided to do was the hard relational work of actually having people encounter each other and get to know each other as human beings to understand where they were coming from. And that held the organization together and ultimately equipped it with the solidarity to take on its next biggest fight, which was on healthcare reform, and I can say more about that later. So I think that interpersonal encounter is really important, also something deeply emphasized by Pope Francis. Reality is greater than ideas, moving beyond the ideological level to the real interpersonal level. But also, it's at that local level that people can develop the sense of personal agency, because your capacity to actually make change that you can see and experience and feel, I did that, we did that, is so much more tangible at the local level. Whether it's creating a stop sign at the intersection where there are accidents every year, or a waterway that prevents flooding in your neighborhood, as cops did in San Antonio during the 70s, right? You can actually feel your capacity to make change for the common good. And so things like the idea that we have a common good start to become real as we do that. The last thing I'd say is that at the local level, you can also listen more closely to the needs of those most affected, which are often grossly abstracted from at the national level. And I think the fact that so many of us now experience our politics through social media, through national political identities, and have really lost touch with our local communities, that's exactly why we need to return to that core idea of the democratic tradition. Democracy happens at the local level, right? And so I think it's a challenge. How do you do that when national politics have become so much the focus of our attention? And a lot of it has to do with building stronger local organizations, but also figuring out how those local organizations can work together and scale up to have national level impact. Because none of these figures I mentioned, Saul Alinsky, Ernie Cortez, a key figure in the IF, Cesar Chavez, thought that politics could be confined only to the local level. Because so many of the problems facing our local communities, state, national, even global. So you need to find some way of bridging the two. And that often happens, I think, by creating organizations that can have a robust local base, but also scale it up, state, federal, the way a lot of labor unions used to be organized. Right? So how do we reinvent that for our politics today?
So that's, I mean, that's really kind of the next question I want to ask. So certainly, so you talked about encounter, and this local level work forces you to encounter other people, and then the next step in that is solidarity. And that's easy to do when you're working towards a common cause on a local level, but when you're working on this national level, where inevitably you're going to have to make or fall into these abstractions, because you simply can't, encounter everybody that you're working with on a nationwide level. How do you create solidarity? What in the Catholic social tradition, how is solidarity created? How is it experienced, and why is it important? And what are some of the major challenges that we need to get through when we're thinking about creating solidarity on a national level?
Yeah. Another small question. Good one. So I think I'd start by just saying, I think the Catholic social tradition has a really rich understanding of what solidarity is. Like at one level, solidarity is the relational fabric and the affective bonds that create a sense of community at all, that allow the members of a community to actually feel we have a community here, we're mutually accountable to each other, and we share a common good in spite of our differences. It builds on what the tradition calls factual interdependence, where we're bound together in all kinds of ways, economically, geographically, technologically. But do we actually have a feeling of that interdependence, that we belong to one community? And I think so often today we see we don't. Think, for example, of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a classic example of forcing us to acknowledge our interdependence. Our health is dependent on each other. We're all dependent on these rapid scientific advances we need to address the problems of our community. And for a small period, and we're all going through this crisis together, right? And for a small period of time, I think, in 2020, we felt that, and then it very quickly fractured and polarized, as so much does, right? And I think structurally, our politics right now is set to break apart solidarity. So how do you create it, then becomes the question. And the Catholic social tradition also says, solidarity is not only what I described earlier, it's also an obligation and a principle. If we live in a society that fractures solidarity, we need to proactively work to build solidarity. and to cultivate the virtue of solidarity, the habit of actually looking at ourselves as members of a community with a common good in spite of all of our differences. And like all virtues, that takes ongoing practice until it becomes habituated, right? And that's what I think organizing does. Organizing builds solidarity. First, by cultivating that sense in the persons who participate in it, we do actually have a common good. We experience it. The common good is a living reality, right? Not just a theoretical abstraction. And we have it in relationship to each other. And then it turns solidarity into the basis of collective power. Power for organizing is simply the ability to do. And it comes from that solidarity we build with each other. And so I think a key part of the question you're asking, to what I was beginning to say earlier, is how do we create solidarity at scale when there's so many forces operating to disrupt it? And there I think where organizing has a lot of wisdom to contribute is you need to think nitty-gritty at the institutional level. For example, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both used to have much more robust local party chapters. If you were a member of those parties, you belonged to a local party chapter. You'd meet other people face to face. That was where a lot of politics happened. And then that would filter up to a state level chapter, and then that would filter up to the national party. And now most people experience those parties through only national politics and through social media, and often through consuming media rather than actually participating. We're political hobbyists, as Eitan Harsh puts it. And so I think what needs to be reinvented in multiple fronts, including in our party politics, are organizational structures that can create strong bonds of solidarity at the local level and disrupt that kind of fragmentation and polarization. By forcing that sort of interpersonal encounter and developing the habit of solidarity, but then that can actually build up to the state level, the regional level, the national level, so that coordinated collective action becomes possible. And some of the masters here are, I would say, unions and fraternal organizations at earlier moments in time, and social movements. This is what social movements do. And I think we really need to get over the idea that social movements are sort of these spontaneous eruptions made possible by social media. Good social movements, robust social movements, like the farm workers, are built from the ground up through organizing. But then that organizing actually scales to a much larger expression of solidarity and ultimately collective impact.
Rosie, I see you as one of these people that really excels on the local level work. You're a leader in community-based pro-life organizing efforts in Arizona. Your organization, Voces Unidas por la Vida, focuses both on education about abortion and on advocacy. Much of your organizing focuses on Latino communities, and in particular on educating Latino communities about abortion. In various races across the country in 2024, Democrats focused their outreach on Latino voters, Latino voters on abortion issues. And you said that approach overstated Latino support for abortion access. Now things have changed a lot, and in this new political landscape, how have you seen things change in the last year throughout your work in Phoenix? How does the abortion issue affect the way that Arizonans engage with electoral politics as a whole?
Well, I think that has given us an encouragement to continue working for life. And one of the things that we do with Voces Unidas por la Vida is to bring up to the community the awareness about the abortion issues. Sometimes when we talk about the babies, we don't see, people like to talk about human rights in a general way. And what we do is to visibilize the victims of the abortion and also advocate for the women who are the ones who are very much affected emotionally and psychologically for an elective abortion. I have been working with women who had abortions, and the pain is terrible for them. It can be happening 23, 40 years, and they still carry the wound with them, within themselves. So we have created programs and projects to help the women to heal from abortion, both through retreats and also through counseling. We have a team of about 20 counselors who work with our organization, and we help them to heal through the post-abortion trauma process. And the other thing that we do is we do conferences of life issues to create awareness about the human and dignity of the baby. Because when we don't see the baby, we think it's easy to get rid of him and to kill him. And we have something called the Museum for Life, which is the Expo Vida. We have 20 banners. We show the beauty of the fetal development, the baby, how it grows in the womb. And we also use the fetal models to create awareness, because when we see the beauty of the baby, and also when we work with women who are pregnant, facing a decision about what they're going to do with the pregnancy, when they see the ultrasound, they hear the baby heartbeat, it makes a big difference, and we save lives. I have here a little image, fetal models that are medically correct, 7, 8, 9, and 10 weeks. This little 10-week baby, this is about the time in which most of the abortions happen. We also created a web page called Abortion Pill Revertir el Misoprostol. And there's some pages in English called Abortion Pill Reversal, because most of the abortions that are happening right now are chemical abortions, about 65% of them. And we want to create an awareness about the need for help for women, because sometimes when they don't, especially with the migrant community that we work with, when they facing an unexpected pregnancy, they think they're the only ones. They feel that they're alone and there's no help for them, especially when they're facing domestic violence or discrimination or the persecution that is happening right now with the migrant communities. It's difficult to reach out to the resources. So I think, coming back to this, that we need to reach out through social media. One of the things that we do is we have a whole national and international network of organizations that help pregnant women, so women know that they're not alone. What we need to do is to reach out more so they know that there's help. Through the zip code, something very important, a zip code, wherever they live in the United States or in Mexico, Latin America, we can get them closer to the pregnancy center where they can get an ultrasound. So what we have seen is changing in the community, that when people become aware of the dignity of the human life, they change. And we see it with the elections. There was the party that was running the campaign mostly on abortion, which that's what we hear the most. I don't think I haven't met one person in the Hispanic community that is the abortion issue is their number one cause. Majority of people, they are pro-life, or either pro-life or indifferent because they don't know anything about it. But I wouldn't say that anybody in the Hispanic community, their first cause is abortion. So we are there for family, for faith, for values, and to reach out to women who are in big need, because when we reach out to them and we help them out and we offer them support through practical ways, we can make a difference. And we want to find a way in which, as a society in Arizona and the rest of the country, which we can have leaders who are elected, who are both pro-life and pro-families and pro-immigrant families. Because we had to look into the situation about the numbers in our population. They predict that in 2050, the majority of everybody's going to be a minority, and the biggest minority is going to be the Hispanic community. And what we're doing right now, for example, in Arizona, 45% of the babies who are being killed by murder by abortion are Hispanic babies. And that 45% of women are getting hurt and attacked to them, and they suffer a lot. So we need to reach out to our politicians and let them know that the first issue is to have education, formation, to have help for women, especially with this new cost that we're having with the economical system. That many of the services that are there to provide help and support to pregnant women, they need to increase them, not diminish them, because that's how we can help and support babies and support life.
Your advocacy and organizing work is focused around particular issues rather than on candidates or political parties. And you've said that you focus on education because, or educating people about abortion, and that this is effective because in general, you've said that people are not ideologues. But how do partisan politics affect issue-based organizing work? How do political messaging efforts affect the way that people engage with and focus on issues in Arizona?
Well, I have seen in Arizona, we're kind of in the middle because we deal with people who consider themselves pro-life, but they might have a different point of view about immigration, and something that affects the relationship between the community that we help and how we relate to them. And on the other side, we deal with a lot of organizations that are also grassroots, and they advocate for the immigrant families, but their leaning and their support is for even associating themselves with organizations like Planned Parenthood. And those associations affect families because once they get together, like we're kind of in the middle, you know? And I think it's a challenge that I have seen personally working in Arizona, in which people can go to two extremes, and I would like to see everybody coming together to protect babies and also work for helping migrant families.
Certainly one of the challenges that the church is straddling all the time in the United States. Joanna, you're one of the founders of the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership, where spiritual reflection informs dynamic organizing efforts in your community in Chicago. How does a religious faith animate and sustain your organizing work, and what is it about faith or about faith-based organizing that really gives it life?
Thank you. You know, growing up, I would hear my mom and her señora friends always say, primero Dios, si Dios quiere, con la voluntad de Dios. And I'm sure everyone can relate here. And for me, it was them invoking God in the smallest of things, and of course, like in the biggest of things, but that was really formative for me. And my mom, growing up, she was really involved in her union, Unite Here Local 1. She was a cafeteria worker. So she would take me and my sisters out to protests and marches, a historic hunger strike in Little Village where I'm from. And you would see people there praying the rosary, doing the sign of the cross. And what they modeled for me is that they were invoking God and organizing, and that it creates this sustenance, this inner fortitude, and this relentless, relentless courage to face whatever injustice that they were facing. And so that's like the legacy that I come from, and that's something we take really seriously at CSPL, to merge the spirituality with the organizing, because it does transform the heart and the spirit. And one quick story that I'll share is on September 13th, we hosted a People's Mass, a Misa Popular outside of the Great Lakes Naval Base, which is where they said they would house hundreds of ICE agents. And historically, People's Masses were done in places like Poland or El Salvador to, one, demonstrate courage, but also to protest injustice. And so we drew upon that legacy to denounce the militarization, to denounce all the evil that's happening in Chicago right now. And it was really beautiful. You know, hundreds of people came, and it was really participatory. You know, during the offertory, we had people bring up pictures of family and friends that had been deported or detained. And the day prior, on September 12th, an ICE agent shot and killed a father, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, who was dropping off his 3-year-old and 7-year-old son at daycare and school. And so people brought up pictures of Silverio and to honor his life. And, you know, after the Mass, we processed to the front of the gates where we sang, you know, freedom songs and traditional misa songs. You know, we did a call to action. The people were blessed with holy water. And what our members shared afterwards is that it was a really powerful and special experience for them. That, you know, on the bus ride back, because it was an hour away, that they were sobbing because they felt that God was with them. And I think that's the power of our faith when it's in public witness. It moves people spiritually and it moves them into action. Because after the Misa Popular, our members came up to us and they're like, when's the next Misa? And we're like all tired and, you know, just wanting to go home. And we're like, we're not sure yet. But, you know, it created this hunger in it for them.
As electoral, Nicholas and Rosie also touched on electoral politics in the United States becoming more and more polarized. And given this reality, it's increasingly difficult to find common ground, let alone solidarity around an issue. How can religion, as a component of faith-based organizing, help to navigate these difficulties specifically? And are there dangers to relying on religion to try to unite people around an issue? What can political campaigns learn from faith-based groups when it comes to pulling people together?
You know, when Silverio was shot and killed by an ICE agent, DHS was quick to release a statement that said he was a criminal illegal alien and that he had a criminal past, and they were talking about traffic tickets, and that he dragged the ICE officer and that the officer was in critical condition. And we know now that none of it's true because of the body cam footage. But the media was quick to share those narratives. And when all you hear about immigrants is that they're criminals, that they're less than human, that gets in people's heads. And it's like evil seeds that are being planted and watered over and over again. But we know better as Catholics. And so when Silverio you know, was shot and killed, one of our member parishes, Our Lady of Monte Carmelo and Melrose Park, called us and said, we need to do a Mass and a Eucharistic procession for Silverio. Not just Silverio, but all of the immigrant community, to say that his life is sacred and that he was a beloved child of God. And so literally last Wednesday, so if I look tired, it's because it's been like back to back to back. we had 500 people come, and the message from the pulpit and from the procession was that Silverio's life is sacred, and what's happening to immigrants that are being detained and deported right now is evil. And so it's that clarifying message. And it was at night, and so when we were outside, you see the sea of candles, you see the big truck with the audio system, and the señoras praying the rosary, and it was, equally another powerful experience. And I feel like that's really the power of our faith and organizing. It's just like it cuts through the noise, it cuts through the dehumanizing narratives and says that we're not that. We're so much more than that, and it brings people together to act with moral clarity.
And further, I would say our faith brings an important principle that even if the person is a criminal, the sacredness
Exactly.
does not go away.
Exactly.
There's that is one of the core messages of the possibility of repentance and renewal.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that Nicholas said, and I want to ask you, Julie. Nicholas had talked about the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans, really losing their local and state level infrastructure and things really being shot up directly to a national level. You're somebody who's been at the highest levels of the Democratic Party. In your opinion, responding to that, what needs to change on the national level to help renew these local level politics that hopefully then lead to solidarity going up the chain?
Yeah, well, I think, really investing in ongoing and year-round organizing as opposed to cyclical organizing or organizing, every, sort of every time there's a major presidential election. I know that that's obviously where there's a, deeper infusion of resources, but I think there are opportunities, as we know, to organize absolutely every day, especially given, again, I think the onslaught of attacks that we've seen on so many different, core issues and kind of key communities. And so I think that's where they can continue to really focus, rebuild infrastructure. Right now, we have a huge redistricting fight on our hands. California is a key state in that effort, and so there's opportunities, I think, to also continue to use, those issues to be able to organize, base build, create a springboard to then, what we know is going to be another critical election in 2026. So I do think it's just investing in organizing and realizing the power of it and the potential to break through in ways that, we need to right now, because this attention economy is one that I think we are all, trying to figure out how do we break through the noise? How do we make sure that these, evil seeds and narratives that are trying to be planted don't actually take root in a way that will be detrimental not just to the immediate, but I think the longer term of our, democracy and what we consider, core democratic values, not party aligned.
I want to make sure we have time to answer any questions that you all might have. So I think I see a couple of microphones. We'll turn it over to you all in the audience. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Feel free to introduce yourself and then go ahead and ask your question. I see one over here. Yeah, Emmanuel.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel. I am a recent graduate of the Master's in Public Policy here at Georgetown. I am also originally from Mexico. I grew up in Mexico City. However, like many of my fellow Mexicans, we all have a relative that came to the U.S., right? So I'm growing up as evangelical Christian in Mexico. Coming here, it was like eye-opening to me. So one thing that I want to ask is, how do we bring this or bridge this gap with our fellow Christians that are blind to many things? How do we bring this spirit of reconciliation, and essentially how do we invoke the Holy Spirit to come and change the hearts and minds over these issues?
Joanna, I'll maybe turn this one over to you. You personally come from a Catholic tradition, but your coalition works across religious lines. How do you build that kind of interfaith coalition?
Yeah, and you know, something in your question is around evangelical Christians is that, you know, one of the most transformative things that I've seen in organizing is this process of conscientization, where people are becoming critical thinkers about the world that they're in, but also about their faith. And that's something that we do at CSPL. We invest a lot in spiritual and theological formation because, you know, which is grounded in the historical Jesus through a popular education framework, because we know how religion can be weaponized to justify hatred and biases. And so, you know, when we do these workshops around the historical Jesus, you know, Jesus in first century Palestine as a poor peasant day laborer who was creating this non-violent movement of love and equality and justice, you know, the number one thing that we hear from our members is, why wasn't I taught this before? And I think there is a thread along Christianity of just really toxic formation that we need to interrupt at every level possible, starting with the local, our churches, seminaries. I mean, I'm talking about everything. And I think when we go back to the roots of a prophetic God, that transforms people. We've seen that transformation happen.
Any other questions? If not, Rosie, I'd like to turn that same question over. Oh, sorry. Well, anyway, okay.
I had a question. Oh, whoa. I did have a question, and it kind of piggybacked a little bit. You touched on it there. I feel like often political initiatives and communities that are based or driven with religious values are often boxed in a category that we might recognize as Christian nationalism, right? And I feel that this antagonizes our message for solidarity, considering that not everyone in this country is Christian or Catholic. So my question is, how can those of us here who do identify as Catholic balance this tightrope of Christian nationalism, which is one of the biggest criticisms I feel coming from those who live in this country who don't agree with us, and therefore they don't want to align themselves with what we have to say.
Nicholas, I actually think you've spoken and written a lot about how a lot of the principles of Catholic social teaching are neatly folded into this community organizing vision, even if they, you know, even if the community organizing efforts are not explicitly religious. Maybe that's, you know, I don't know. Maybe you have some thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I do. Great question. Thank you. So I answer it at multiple levels. I think one, there is a need for work within particular religious communities, within the Catholic community, within the evangelical community, to overtly resist Christian nationalist interpretations of the faith within that particular community, because pastors, theologians, leaders in those communities will have unique authority in those communities. So there's very much a piece of internal work to be done there. And I think within Catholicism, our faith is a global faith and a global tradition. And so there are just really powerful principles in it, including in our social teaching, that directly cut against the idea that this particular nation is God's appointed, you know, messenger on earth, much less imperial power, right? And so, and there are forces in the church actively working in the other direction, as I'm sure you know. So it's vitally important for there to be an internal struggle on that. But I would say organizing is also kind of a really, organizing is Catholic social teaching in action at its best. And I think in the US, it's fascinating that although at least the broad-based organizing tradition I come from with the Industrial Areas Foundation began mostly in Catholic immigrant communities in Chicago, initially Eastern European, and then quickly moved to Latino communities in California. It relatively quickly, by the 50s, had become an ecumenical tradition at a time when ecumenism was very hard. Vatican II hadn't happened yet. And so at the local level, you already had broad-based organizations, or faith-based, they were called people's organizations at the time, building relationships among Catholics and various denominations of Protestants, when that was a countercultural thing to do, and challenged a lot of the narratives in both of those communities. The Catholic narratives about who Protestants were, and the Protestant narratives about who Catholics were. And exactly the same process we've talked about, you know, of that interpersonal relationship building, disrupting these ideological abstractions to make solidarity possible, actually happened. And in the 2000s and 2010s, the field of faith-based organizing that grew out of that heritage became very robustly interfaith, with a very strong Jewish and Muslim participation, and increasingly secular and Eastern religious participation as well. And what's really unique about those organizations, I think, is I, as a Catholic theologian and somebody who traces the history, can look at them and say, look, you're doing Catholic social teaching. You are living out our faith exceptionally well, better than many overtly Catholic organizations do. And yet, you've created a tent of solidarity that's inclusive enough for all of these other groups to find and live those very principles through the language and the framework and the stories of their own faith and make them their own. Right? And as a Catholic theologian, I would say that's how social teaching understands itself. The principles of social teaching are not meant to be specific or exclusive to Catholics. They're supposed to be moral principles that reflect our dignity and nature as human beings, that are to some extent accessible to reason, but that we all have specific interpretations of depending on the traditions we come from. That's great in theory. How do you actually do it in practice? I think organizing shows how you do it in practice. And again, you've got to start at the local level, because that's where the disruptive work of countering all of those ideologies, including Christian nationalism, can actually, take root and plant a very different kind of seed in the people actually doing it.
I'm curious also about how the experience of that happens on the ground. And Rosie, a lot of the work that you do is motivated by Catholic principles, but it's never, your work is not explicitly Catholic in the way that, but you get a lot of support from various Christian and other religious coalitions. How do you see that the religiosity or the religious groups that support or are engaged in your work, how does it help and how does it hinder your cause?
Well, I don't think it hinders. Actually, our faith is what's driving us to save lives. And I would like to share something about a big resource that we have. A Bishop Emeritus of the Diocese of Phoenix, Bishop Thomas Olmsted, he wrote Catholics in the Public Square. And with this document, he reminds us that our faith is not meant to be hidden. We are not, if you are Catholic, you're Christian, you're not a third-class citizen. And that's how we are meant to feel sometimes when we want to express our beliefs about what is the best thing to do for our other people, especially to advocate for the unborn, to speak against abortion, against euthanasia, against discrimination, and against racism. But, Dr. Nathanson, who was the founder of the Association of Abortionists, he changed his mind. After legalizing abortion, he changed his mind, and he told us about the strategies that they use to attack people who were defending life, especially Catholics. And one of the things that they did was to shame people, to call them fanatics, to call them crazy, and put a label on them so they will be ashamed. So I think that's something that we had to think about it, that just because we are Christians or Catholics, we shouldn't be ashamed of what we are supporting, which is life. And I think once we are aware of those strategies that they use, the other side uses to put our work down, we need to be more bold enough to put a barrier to the work that we do. And I think the values that we have in the Latino community, which are family, faith, and the reverence for life in all the stages, they're a beacon for American politics. It's a gift. And I think that we are boldly and brave about defending those issues. We can make some changes, not to feel ashamed, because shame is one of the things that drives the work down. Because what I have seen, especially with our faith communities, I come from Guanajuato, where we had the Cristero movement. People die for their faith. I just came back from Mexico with a very special gift, which was a relic from a saint, a priest who was the martyr of the Eucharist. He died to protect Jesus himself. And I think that as Catholics, if we get together with the source of love and knowledge, which is God, we can be a fountain of grace for other people. I don't think it's a problem or a hindering issue to be a person of faith. I think this is a time in which we have been told for so long that being Christian or being Catholic something is to be ashamed of. I grew up in Mexico, and I grew up Catholic, and I never felt the attacks until I came to the United States to be, ostracized or criticized for my beliefs, for being pro-life, for being Catholic, for being a person of faith. And I think we need to learn how to get along and not tolerate, but to understand each other. We work in the pro-life movement with lots of different faiths, Mormons, Protestants, even atheists. I met one group of atheists from Washington. They're right here. And they found, in an abortion center, they found more than 100 bodies of babies, including 5 of them who were almost full term. With that picture that they took of these these victims, they visibilized the issue of what is happening with our little unborn babies here in the United States. That image has gone across Mexico. When we were in Mexico fighting for life in Guanajuato, a few months ago, they were trying to legalize abortion up to birth. We showed that image, and it made a big difference. And this is happening right now in Washington, D.C. and all over the country. Because we don't see dignity, we call them fetuses, we call them products or cells or products of conception. We undermine their dignity, so we need to change also the language, how we talk about life. We talk about babies, they're unborn babies, preborn babies, and once we change our idea about how we see, like we talk about the immigrant, call them illegal, we give them a right to, in our minds, to a right to abuse them and commit discrimination against them. Same thing happens with a life issue. Calling them fetuses, calling them products of conception is a way to give permission to harm them. So we need to change the euphemisms, the words that we use to refer to life.
So we're right at the hour now. I know we have probably some other questions, but for those of you who are here in person, we will have a reception right after this, so feel free to stick around and ask your questions then. Before we wrap, I want to go one more time to each of you really quickly with a final question, 1 minute, quick answers. How can we contribute to efforts to renew a focus on the common good? What can our audience do today to improve the culture of our national politics? Julie, I'll kick it off with you.
Well, I mean, I think, finding opportunities to get engaged and build community. Right now, I think it is really important to be able to create spaces and be a part of spaces where you're in community with one another and where you're able to be safe and thrive and resilient and restored and, in my mind, kind of rejuvenated to continue the fight. So that would be my recommendation.
Nicholas, same question to you. How can we contribute to efforts to renew a focus on the common good? What can our audience do today to improve the culture of our national politics?
My first thought to what Joanna said earlier is relationships, relationships, relationships. The common good comes alive in the experience of having relationships across multiple kinds of difference and finding the agency that those relationships make possible, which is what organizing does. So look for contexts where you can build relationships across difference. And I would add to that, cultivating relationships in a way that lasts often, if not always, requires institutions. And we live in a very anti-institutional culture in many ways right now, where distrust of institutions is widespread, where for young people, institutions are about the least sexy thing imaginable. And so trying to cultivate a sense that institutions matter because they create the contexts in which relationships can be built and sustained over time. So relationships, but also finding the right institutions that are doing the relational work and help them survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm. Rosie, to you the same question. What can our audience do to improve the culture of our national politics?
Well, I think I would like to focus on the spiritual part because we need a spiritual revival, a renewal, a return to God. Pushing faith out of the public life has only led to chaos, violence, and disregard for human dignity. So we need a renewal of our spiritual and life and also our relationship with God. And above all, choose Jesus as your king. Don't put any party or politician in a shrine. Only God deserves your worship, fidelity, and trust. No party, no politician deserves your worship. Only God is worthy of your fidelity and your trust.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Joanna, what can our audience do today to improve the culture of our national politics and focus on the common good?
Yeah, very similar to what Nicholas shared, which, by the way, sometimes I forgot that I was on the panel because he's such an amazing professor. I was like, wow, I'm learning so much from him. But, this morning I got coffee with a friend who's in the audience. And walking to the Union Station, there was a choir of people singing This Little Light of Mine. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, those are like the small acts of resistance that are so powerful. And I think one small act of resistance is relationship building. Mm-hmm. It really is. It's talking to your neighbor. It's talking to your fellow parishioners. It's talking to your coworkers. It's your apartment, whoever's in your apartment complex, like breaking down this hatred and polarization starts with us. It's not going to fall from the sky. And we have to get our hands dirty, like Pope Francis said. And so I think we need to commit to a discipline of ongoing relationship building. And I think that's going to renew national politics as well.
Before we close, I want to mention some upcoming dialogues and gatherings that we'll be hosting throughout this semester. In a few weeks, we'll have our first Salt and Light gathering of the semester for young adults. It'll also be here on the Capitol campus, and we'll be discussing broken links. How do social media silos undermine, or how do media silos undermine social solidarity? So some of the conversations we started here, we'll really be having them in a focused way later on. On October 30th, we'll have a dialogue to discuss Pope Leo XIV, the dignity of work and a priority for the poor in times of artificial intelligence and economic turmoil. And then on November 18th, at Georgetown's Hilltop campus, we'll welcome Washington's Cardinal Archbishop Robert McElroy for a special Dahlgren dialogue hosted with our colleagues at Georgetown's Office of Mission and Ministry to discuss faith, democracy, and the common good. You can find out more about these and other future dialogues on our website. We hope that those of you in person can stay for the reception and continue the conversation. This discussion was recorded, and we'll post it on our website and social media channels for later viewing. And you can also see follow-up resources from the conversation on our website as well. Thanks to everyone who helped to put this together, including the AV team, the catering teams, my colleagues, Kim Daniels, Kim Mazik, John, Chris, Anna, Michaela, Blaine, and Neil, the student who helped us out today, for their support and efforts that made this evening such a success. Thanks to all of you for joining us, both here at Georgetown and those who are joining online. And finally, join me in thanking Julie Chavez Rodriguez, Nicholas Hayes Mota, Rosie Villegas Smith, and Joanna Arellano Gonzalez for being a part of tonight's conversation.